I'd rather grow cobwebs and an extra flap of skin on my vagina than to give it up to a nigga in an effort to keep him. This is Bedtime Stories, Grown-Up Edition, Genesis, bonus episode 1, part 2. When we left off, everybody in the family was getting the 411 on the efforts that would need to be taken to keep everyone safe. The night before, Samuel had flown Zora to Puerto Rico, and since his wife was in Texas with Big Wood, it wasn't difficult for Zora to convince Samuel to stay right there with her. Zora and Lorenzo had been having a difficult time. When Zora had returned to New York after Big Wood's funeral in Texas, Lorenzo and Zora shared an intimate moment that should have brought them closer together, but instead, it sent Zoe running for the hills. It scared the bejesus out that boy. Both Zora and Zoe were inexperienced sexually, and they both committed to waiting until after marriage to go all the way. And that had been pretty easy for Zoe to do up until that point because he'd never had a serious girlfriend, and he'd never been in love. So with emotions high and the couple home alone, Zoe had to tear herself away from Zora when their passionate kiss had taken them from first to second base. And yes, we talking about two full-grown adults, but with Zora having been a victim of the international trafficking organization and Zoe being on the spectrum, they were learning as they went together. There was way too much going on in the families for either of them to be able to consult with the people they trusted the most to give them the support that they needed. Surprisingly, Zora had found a competent ally in Truth, and Zoe had found Q to be a great resource. Unfortunately for them both, neither of their trusted sources were available. And when Zora tried to discuss it with her sister Zyla, Zyla did what she always did. She clowned the hell out of Zora. Zyla had 3 kids with 3 different men. She could not comprehend how her full-grown, fine-as-wine sister managed to still be a virgin, or how she managed to keep her hands off her fine-behind boyfriend Lorenzo. Hell, Zora had spent several weeks in Puerto Rico when all of the drama with Amir first started. So when she'd come home and reported that she had not been deflowered, Zyla said, "You gonna let Miss Kitty dry up and fall out before you ever get a chance to use her. And I hate that for you, because you're gonna mess around and that man gonna find somebody else." Zora said, "I'd rather grow cobwebs and an extra flap of skin on my vagina than to give it up to a nigga in an effort to keep him." Zyla said, "Well, you just might." And when Zoe returned to the island and found Maribel there, because she'd gone back to Puerto Rico when she found out that Portia was alive, pregnant, and wanted her man, Lorenzo confided in his big sister, and she was clearly not in the presence of mind to give any useful advice. I mean, what she said would have worked if she was talking to anyone else, but she failed to consider that she was asking too much of her socially inept brother when she told him to just tell Zora how he felt, what he wanted, and what he was comfortable with. Then she told him he was going to have to poop or get off the pot, because if he wanted to be in a committed relationship, he was going to have to learn to go with the flow. That would have certainly been great advice if she was talking to someone who was neurotypical. Communicating how he felt would have required that he understood how he felt, and he didn't. So when Lorenzo learned that Samuel was staying in Puerto Rico with Zora, and the stepfather and stepdaughter duo would be sharing the same villa, he was overjoyed and relieved. Conversations between the two since he'd left her in New York were strained, and every time Zora tried to broach the subject of their intimate moment, he changed it. When she tried to get him to come back to New York, he'd avoided it, saying that he needed to stay close to home because there was drama ensuing and he had a whole lot of work to do. When he realized that the drama ensuing had the potential to touch his love, he'd insisted that she return to Puerto Rico. And then he begged his mother to keep Zora busy. But like everyone else in the family who was gainfully employed, Dr. Marisol Lopez had patients, and she could not close down the only obstetrical and gynecological clinic on the island that offered both homeopathic and traditional medicine. It was bad enough that she wouldn't have the help of her daughter, Maribel, in the clinic, and it would just be her, a midwife, and several nurses. But she had several patients who would do it about the same time. Her one saving grace was that Salima had transferred her care to Texas. But with the clinic short-handed, she was adamant that she could not take any more patients. Before Samuel and Zora boarded a Lopez flight from New York to Puerto Rico, Samuel and Zora had helped Zyla and her 3 children board a flight to Colombia. With Big Wood deceased, Samuel had embraced the responsibility of ensuring the safety of both of his stepdaughters and his brand new grandchildren. So he tasked Alejandro Garcia, the head of the 5th family, and his stepchildren's second cousin, with ensuring the safety of Zyla and her children. The location of Big Wood's ex-girlfriend Tasha's 2 sons was unknown to the family. They did know that Big Wood had made arrangements for their care. So Zyla was shocked when she arrived in Colombia and found Tasha's 2 sons and her cousin Alejandro in his wife's care. She was also shocked to discover what all her cousin Alejandro was into when Samuel had informed her that her and her children and Zora all needed to leave New York, he'd provided her with very little information. She'd understood that it was connected to threats associated with the International Trafficking Organization, but she'd never been fully brought up to speed on what her brother, Q, Samuel, and various other members of the family were all wrapped up in. So when she arrived at the heavily guarded Garcia estate, got her children and all of their belongings settled inside, and then saw Tasha's sons, she said, yeah, somebody gonna have to make this make sense. I knew you had some dough, but why you need armed men and women all over your dang on property? And what kind of money you got that you can afford to take care of 6 extra people? Alejandro said, you mean to tell me that neither your brother or your father, your mother, nobody explained to you that you're connected? Really? Zyla said, my brother kept his business to himself. And as far as I know, Big Sam is retired from his family business. But he never did say what that business was. Either way, I don't know what the hell is going on here. When Alejandro finished giving Zyla the high-level explanation of the 5 families and their family's role in it, Zyla said, so you mean to tell me I've been struggling to take care of these kids for all these years and we rich? Alejandro said, you have not been struggling. I know full well that Wood took very good care of you. And now that he's gone, all you have to do is ask, and Samuel will make sure that you and your children have everything you need. Zyla said, all right, so I'm not struggling, but I ain't living like this. Alejandro said, I worked for this. I worked to keep this. You can't expect to live like this without working for it. Your brother worked for everything that he had, and he didn't live like this. And he worked entirely too hard to have you living in the lap of luxury, so you could let deadbeats mooch off you and thus mooch off him. Zyla said, so he was like a low man on the totem pole. Alejandro said, not exactly. Your brother was committed to getting out. He did that. A situation arose that required that he step up to the plate, and he agreed to do so. He was never in it for the money or the prestige. He got in it to make sure he could take care of you, your sister, and your mother. He stayed in it long enough to ensure that he could take care of you all for years to come. But this was not the life that he wanted to live long term. And to be fair, he didn't really choose this life. It chose him. He's gone because of this life. And I need you to know that the persons responsible for his death have been and are being dealt with. That's the reason why you and your sister needed to leave New York. The International Trafficking Organization did not take too kindly to having their operations interrupted and their numbers dwindled. They've made a credible threat against everybody and anybody connected to the 5 families. And we are committed to keeping you and your family safe. Zyla said, do you know how pissed off my man is right now? Samuel wouldn't let me tell him anything. And he's my youngest son's father. I know he's got to be blowing my phone up. I told him that I would call him when we got settled. But he's going to want to know, 1, why he couldn't come with us, and 2, where in the hell we are. What am I supposed to tell him? Alejandro said, whatever you want to. Anything you can think of other than the truth. Whatever you tell him, though, make sure it does not lead him or anyone else to my doorstep or to Manny's. I'm sorry that you two had to be separated, but as I understand it, you needed to be. Your brother let you live your own life and make your own decisions. You may not feel like he was a bad one, but I'm telling you he was. He is not welcome here. And if you're willing to risk your own life to be with him, you're going to have to leave those kids here. Zyla said, I'm not leaving my damn kids. Alejandro said, good. My suggestion would be that you call him and end things. Tell him you found somebody else. Tell him you're never coming back. Tell him whatever will keep him from coming to look for you. Zyla said, why do I have a feeling that you know something I don't? Alejandro said, because I know lots of things you don't. I hope you know his phone number by heart, because you won't be getting your cell phone back. Before Samuel, Zora, Zyla, and her 3 children headed to the airstrips, Samuel had taken Zyla's cell phone and all of her and her children's technology, put it all in Faraday bags, and handed the bags to the guards who were responsible for traveling with them. Meanwhile, in Dallas, Sincere had arrived at the Dalai Lama, the ice cream shop in uptown Dallas. He'd followed all of the instructions that his security had given him. His driver had gotten him to the meetup spot early, and once inside, he sat at the table that his security had identified as the safest position, where he could see the front entrance, the back exit, and he could be seen by the shooters who were strategically positioned across the street, above and inside the surrounding buildings. For his safety and his dates, he'd received very strict instructions. They'd notify him when she was approaching the establishment. He'd look at his phone, pretending to be distracted, so he didn't have to get up and open the door. Once she was inside, he'd stand up and wait for her at the counter. If anything didn't look or feel right, he was either supposed to snatch or leave Natalia and make his way to the back door. There were hand signals for everything from one or both of them needing to use the restroom, one or both of them deciding that the date was over, and a signal that he really hoped that he would get to use. The signal for she's agreed to extend our date and we're going to another location. Between imagining what he was going to do to Natalia if he was able to get her to go back to the crib with him, and reminiscing on the conversation that he'd had with his brother Saint that morning, since he was having a hard time paying attention to his surroundings and keeping an eye out for the signal that she was approaching. That morning when he got up to prepare for his date, he called Saint. Saint had never showed up for Stephanie and Corey's going away karaoke night hosted by Angela at the main house in Denton. He hadn't even called his brother to say that he was in Texas. So when Saint answered, Sincere said, "Yo, what up with you, bro? I figured you was going to be in town and you was going to come through the party last night." Saint said, "I am in town, but I had other plans." Sincere said, "What kind of plans you had that resulted in you standing the whole family up?" Saint said, "I'm sure I wasn't missed." Sincere said, "A couple of the family asked where you was at. I figured you hadn't gotten here yet." Saint said, "Well, I'm here." Sincere said, "You good?" Saint said, "Yeah, I just got a lot on my mind. What's up?" Sincere said, "All right, so check it. I got a date with that girl, Natalia. The one that Angela and Catherine seem to think would make a good wife." Saint said, "That's what's up." Sincere said, "Yeah, it's at 1 o'clock at some ice cream shop." Saint said, "What? Why in the hell would you do that?" Sincere said, "Listen, I told the girl anytime and any place, and that's what she said." Saint asked, "You got plans for security and all that?" Sincere said, "One of the generals worked all that out last night." Saint said, "Good." Sincere said, "But nobody watches my back like you. I was thinking you could don one of them disguises and be up in the spot." Saint said, "For what, nigga? You need moral support? If you worked with your general to get your security all worked out, it's never a good idea to throw anybody else in the plan at the last minute." Sincere said, "I don't need moral support, but I don't trust nobody like I trust you. And I figure if this all works out, she'll need to get used to being around you." Saint said, "For what?" Sincere said, "Because eventually you're going to be my right hand." Saint said, "What you talking about, Willis? I have no aspirations to be your right hand." Sincere said, "Why not? You can't possibly be content with the money you making as a finisher." Saint said, "Nigga, it ain't about money. You gonna be hard pressed to do your job, have a wife and a family. And whoever fulfills the role of your right hand is gonna be even more hard pressed, playing Robin to your Batman and having a life of his or her own. Not to mention, you need somebody a lot more experienced considering how inexperienced you are. We don't both need to be trying to earn the respect of men who've been in position for decades. Not to mention I earned my spot. You're still earning yours. I get that these families operate on nepotism, and it's easier to trust somebody that you grew up with and who you share DNA with. But in this, they gotta want the job, and I don't." Sincere said, "Come on, bro. You deserve to make way more money than you are. You deserve not to have to be doing these assignments and operations where your life is constantly and always on the line. And so is your freedom." Saint said, "As your right hand, not only would my life and freedom be constantly on the line, but I'd then be responsible for the life and freedom of thousands of other people. I don't want that responsibility. And I'm definitely not jacking having my freedom of movement severely restricted, having where I can go and who I can see limited. Nah, I'm good. No problem with putting in work for the family, putting in work on your behalf. But I have dreams and aspirations of my own. And it's clear that you haven't even considered that. I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing what you do, going where you go, being around the people you want to be around." Sincere said, "What's that supposed to mean?" Saint said, "Nigga, all your friends is goofies. All our lives, when your friends came around, I got low. You ain't notice?" Sincere said, "I just figured you preferred to be by yourself." Saint said, "Nah, I don't suffer goofies. The difference between me and you is you be so busy laughing at the clownish that you forget to look around and check to see if you in the same damn circus. And what's even worse is, hell, you the ringleader." Sincere said, "Nigga, tell me how you really feel." Saint said, "My bad, yo. I love you, bro. You smart as hell. You damn good at strategy. You are in the right position. But in order to be good at it, you got a whole lot to learn. And Big Cuz gonna have a lot of work to do, turning you into a man you ain't never had to be. Backed into a corner, you gonna fight your way out. Only problem is, you fight your way out of corners you got yourself in. And don't get me wrong, there's never been a time in my life when I couldn't count on you to have my back. But you kinda ain't had no choice, seeing as how you probably got me in it in the first place. I done got dirty more times because of the dust that you kicked up than anything that I've ever done. Hell, when we was kids and I almost died in that ATV accident, It was because of you. I ain't blame you because I made my own choices. But I would have never even been there that day if it wasn't for your bright idea. Sincere said, all right, I got it. You don't want to be too close to the fire because you're scared of the smoke. Saint said, nah, I'd rather not be next to you when you light the fire because I don't want to get burned. Sincere said, so basically, you're not coming. Saint said, no, nigga. Call me later and let me know how it go. Sincere was in a kerfuffle. Not only had his brother just shown him a view of himself that he'd never quite seen before, but his pronouncement that he had no intentions or interests in being his right hand meant that both Amir and their mother Annabelle had died for absolutely nothing. Amir never needed to plot or scheme to retain his position as the right hand, because Saint didn't want it. And he was so distracted by his thoughts that he missed the signal, didn't even see when Natalia came in, and failed to follow the plan that his security had created. Instead of meeting her at the counter, he looked up and was startled to see Natalia standing right in front of him. Natalia had no idea exactly what position Sincere was in the vying for, but if it was that easy to sneak up on him, he clearly had a whole lot to learn. She said, well, it's a good thing I wasn't here to rob you. Then, under her breath, where only he could hear her, she said, I hope your cousin never puts you in charge of securing a safe house. And at the same volume, he said, what the hell you know about a safe house? Natalia said, enough. What exactly were you thinking about so intently that I was able to slide up on you without you even knowing I was there? Sincere said, I was thinking about you. Natalia said, really? And what exactly about me were you pondering? Sincere said, how beautiful you are and how blessed I am to have this opportunity. Natalia said, right. Have you had an opportunity to check out the menu? Sincere and Natalia ordered ice cream, sat at the same table that Sincere had commandeered, and enjoyed some small talk. Nothing deep or serious. They primarily covered the basics. Age, zodiac signs, where they went to college, what they majored in, family composition. They even talked about how the karaoke night turned out. Natalia had assumed that either Angela or Q had provided Sincere with the basic information about who she was, where she was from, and her connections to the Lopez family. While Catherine had said that she would not tell Sincere who Natalia's father was, neither Angela nor Q had made such a commitment. And she didn't know Catherine well enough to know whether she would keep her word. Not to mention, if he was in the running for a high-up position in the St. James family, then he had access to lots of information on lots of people and connections to other people who could get lots of information on lots of people. So there was no way that Sincere would show up for a date with her without completely checking her out. Natalia had no way to know that Catherine had kept her word. And neither Angela nor Q had told Sincere a thing. And his attempts to investigate her had netted him nothing because Angela had changed the way that the Notorious Five Families files were being managed. For Natalia's part, if Sincere was any other man, she would have run an extensive background check on him. And when she'd called her father the night before, her expectation was that her father would already know all about him, or that he'd be willing to dig into him and tell her what he found. But that wasn't the case, and she was impressed. Her previous interactions with Sincere didn't leave her impressed anyway. And if he was coming with a recommendation from her boss and connected to one of the five families, there would absolutely be consequences and repercussions if he mishandled the daughter of Nate Jimenez. Her father had trained her well, so she had spotted several men and two women who were clearly on the job. And while she didn't typically travel with security of her own, her father had called her just that morning, informed her that there was a major issue affecting all five of the families, and had her open the door so she could greet the head of her new security team. She'd already received an encrypted message from her boss, letting her know that there would be an all-hands meeting the following morning in reference to a security issue. So with all of that being the case, she didn't see a need to attempt to guard the details of her personal life from Sincere. And for his part, he'd assumed that she was so freely sharing her personal information because she already knew all of his. He'd been told that she was connected. There was a file on her on the St. James server that was sealed and password protected. And neither Angela nor Q would have been so intent on him pursuing her if there was any reason why he needed to guard his personal information. So he was more than willing to meet her fact for fact. Like her, he'd assumed that whatever Angela, Q, and Catherine hadn't told her, she'd found out from whomever she was connected to in the families. So whatever they were sharing was customary small talk for a first date. He had no way to know that Natalia was bored to death. She could not wait for the date to end, because as far as she could tell, Sincere was as deep as a puddle. And for her part, she had no idea that Sincere couldn't wait either for the small talk and ice cream eating to come to a conclusion so that he could up the ante and invite her to dinner. in an environment that he could completely control. And if he was lucky, he'd be able to convince her to go with him back to the house at the family complex in Denton where he'd been staying. And just as he went to propose that they continue to date at dinner, he realized that she checked her watch for the 4th time. He said, "You in a hurry? You got somewhere you need to be?" Natalia said, "No, but let's be real here. This conversation is not all of that captivating. We're talking about things that we can learn about each other over time. Tell me something. What's the last book you read?" Sincere said, "Well, as a function of my job, I had to read The Art of War. It was dry, boring as hell, and took me over a week to read." Natalia said, "It's 192 pages. You must have been real busy if it took you a week to read it." Sincere said, "No, I just didn't find it that interesting." Natalia said, "I'm assuming that you're competing for a position where you need to know both your enemy and yourself in order to avoid defeat and win without fighting. Am I correct?" Sincere said, "You could say that." Natalia said, "And you didn't find the timeless wisdom that the art of war offers on strategy, conflict, and human behavior, concepts and principles that transcend time and culture? Not even the least bit interesting?" Sincere said, "No, I didn't." Natalia said, "Got it. Well, good luck with your endeavors." Sincere said, "All right. What's the last book you had to read for work?" Natalia said, "The Science of Organizational Change" by Paul Gibbons. 448 pages. I read it in one day, took notes, and did a presentation on it 2 days later. The author did a fastidious job of applying scientifically founded, rigorous, thought-provoking, and practical wisdom to actionable, sensible, and evidence-based insights to make organizations more agile and success more likely. Sincere said, "Yeah, way too serious for me." Natalia said, "This from someone with a business degree?" Sincere said, "That was not my choice. That was all my pops doing. And for the record, I graduated summa cum laude. I'm more than capable of doing what I have to do, even when it's not what I want to do. What I really want to do is continue having these kinds of conversations, figuring out who each of us is. But I'd rather do it in a different environment. Would you say we parlay this into dinner?" Natalia said, "I don't think so. It's okay to say we tried it and it didn't work." Sincere said, "You curbing me?" Natalia said, "I wouldn't say that. I'd prefer to think of it as you're not really my cup of tea, but it's a good thing that I'm not the only woman who drinks tea, right?" Sincere said, "Nah, I'd rather think of it as they ain't stopped making bad when they made you. There's a whole lot more of them out there, and they're a whole lot less bitchy than you too." I'm telling you beyond your way.